Well, at the desk with me now to give us more insights as to how this Eskom problem can potentially be fixed is Anthea Jeffery from the South African Institute of Race Relations. Anthea, always good to have you with us on the show. Let's pick up on the downgrade first and maybe focus on the negativity and work our way to the solutions that you have proposed. This downgrade, how significant is it? Because we know government has committed 23 billion rand, if I'm not mistaken, from the State of the Nation address to help save Eskom. Clearly, this sounds as though capital raising initiatives are going to be even tougher going forward.
That's exactly the problem. And of course, the 23 billion is only a tiny portion of the financing that Eskom needs. And I think what Standard & Poor's said, as Chris Yelland had also reflected, is an increased concern about governance at Eskom following the suspension of these executives. But certainly the consequence of the downgrade is that borrowing is likely to become more expensive for Eskom, and it's very important that it should be able to borrow. As Chris Yelland was saying, at the moment, Eskom is trying to load tariffs so that consumers today pay a vast amount of the capital cost of building new stations, whereas the more logically economic way is to borrow the capital amount needed for the new construction and then pay it back over a long period of time, 30, 40 years, the lifetime of the new plant. And that means the financial burden can be spread over today's consumers and tomorrow's as well, which is much more realistic.
Despite the fact that we've seen a lot of news and headlines related to Eskom, could we say that we didn't see this coming?
The downgrade?
Yes.
No, I think the downgrade has certainly been on the cards. I think it's been predicted that it would happen. And the question really is what Eskom is going to do to get out of the hole in which it and the country now are. And we need very urgent attention to this problem, partly because we have these long delays on the new build of Medupi and Kusile, which in themselves were started far too late. Back in 1998 with the white paper on energy, it was certainly recognized then that South Africa was likely to run out of power in 2007 unless we built new stations, but we delayed the new build. Now the actual construction has been very much delayed, seems to have been very inefficient. And what is particularly worrying is that even if we get Kusile, Medupi and Ngula, the pump storage scheme, on track in 2020, fully operating, we will still, if we want to have economic growth of 3% a year by 2030, or rather on a sustained basis through until 2030, we will need more electricity still. We will need another 18,000 megawatts, which is the equivalent of 4 new Kusiles or 8 new Coburgs.
Sure.
And so that just highlights the urgency of getting onto the right path in terms of electricity generation and distribution so that consumers can count on having electricity when they need it, from industry through to retail and households.
Is it possible for us to get onto that path, and are there proposed solutions that we can implement now?
I think so. The IRR has just published an in-depth study by Andrew Kenny, who's an engineer and an energy expert, and he says that there are no quick fixes, but there is a clear path out of this, and that the first thing we need to do is to depoliticize Eskom, to recognize once again that its sole function is to produce enough reliable energy at a price which covers its costs, but not more than that. And he would strongly recommend that we do borrow to cover capital costs of new build rather than loading it onto the tariffs. And that we must allow other people to generate as well. We've had a certain amount of contracts extended to independent power producers in the renewable energy field. But we need to do much more than that, because renewable energy has many strengths, but it's difficult to rely on renewable for base load generation. For that we need coal, and we need other sources as well. So we need also to remove whatever administrative and political obstacles there are to private generators starting to ramp up their production and knowing that they'll be able to transport it via the grid, which at the moment is fully controlled by Eskom, to distributors who in turn will take the power onto the final consumer. So we need more generators, and we need a competitive system which will allow them to compete with Eskom on commercial grounds. We also need the grid to be taken out of Eskom's monopoly control, something which the ANC unfortunately has just set its mind against. But there was a bill which was put before Parliament last year that would have achieved this, The ISMO bill would have created a new, still state-owned operator, but an entity that was out of Eskom's fold, and which would have a mandate of transmitting the electricity produced by any number of independent power producers plus Eskom to the final centres of demand where it can be distributed to final consumers. And those are probably the most important things we need to do in the short term. But another immediate step, which Andrew Kenny recommends, is having a look at the idea of dividing South Africa into two time zones, as it were. Peak demand, round about supper time, is the demand that is most difficult for Eskom to meet. So one half of the country should have supper time at what is now 6 p.m. and the other half should have it at what is now 7 p.m. And that in itself would help to spread the load and mean that it doesn't all arise at that one key hour, which is so difficult for Eskom to manage with so much of its generating capacity out of commission.
Anthea, I want to get your perspectives on leadership. Eskom has been known to have very many CEOs, and just recently there were reports about the exorbitant salaries that these chief executives, together with their other peers, might have received. Is this also an area of concern where we need to look at what we can afford? First of all, look at the skills base of the leadership and how much they are worth being remunerated, and also the objectives that they achieve during their time in their tenure?
I think clearly we must look at executive leadership. It's extremely important in any institution, and one as big and complex as Eskom needs particularly skilled and experienced leadership. And I think there's a sort of sense of outrage in the country if Eskom's leaders are awarded large bonuses at a time when the power system seems to be failing the country. But I don't think we can leave it just at the level of the executive leadership. We need to look up and down the system to where the skill shortages or the lack of institutional memory and experience are. And there was a recent report by Solidarity, a trade union, which spoke really of the extent to which Eskom, through a very fast pace of affirmative action in the period from about 1995 to 2005, paid something like 800 million rand to actually encourage engineers, managers, technicians with a great deal of experience and institutional memory to leave. And they were replaced by people who naturally had less experience and institutional memory. And that in itself has affected the capacity and the efficiency of Eskom. And one fears that these are the sorts of issues that are in play when disasters happen, as have twice happened at the Duva power station, the last one in March 2014, when there was what is euphemistically called an overpressure incident, but actually was an explosion. And it seemed that the rules about how you should start a coal-fired power unit were not followed. We use coal powder or pulverized fuel, and it's very important when you're using something so highly inflammable that you should first have the flame and then feed in the PF or the coal powder. But it seems on this occasion they fed a flame into a furnace that was already filled with this pulverized fuel or coal power, and so it blew up.
Exactly.
Taking yet more capacity out of the system.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to pause it there for today, but certainly interesting insights are coming through from that report, and hopefully the colleagues that you have in the war room might be paying attention to these potential proposed solutions. But one thing we know for sure is that it's not going to happen overnight. Well, that was Anthea Jeffery, who is the head of policy research at the Institute of Race Relations.